Hi, this is BrassCheck, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation here. And I was just talking with my guest before the call. This is a topic that is very difficult to wrap one's mind around. And the reason for that is the level of disinformation, relentless, professional, widespread disinformation is so huge, it's very hard to just get any clarity on the subject at all. And there's probably a good reason why a lot of disinformation has been pumped into this topic. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about an organization that does a very thorough and credible and professional job of trying to cut through all the smoke and mirrors and get to the truth. Now, the topic is UFOs. Now, what is a UFO? It's an unidentified flying object. Now, clearly, unidentified flying objects exist because all the time people are seeing things which cannot be properly identified. Now, what does that mean is a whole other story. So today on the line, we've got Ben Moss with MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. He's the chief field investigator for the state of Virginia. So, Ben, the first thing I'm going to ask is if you can tell us a little bit about MUFON. I know a lot of my listeners are aware of it to various degrees, how it's structured, how it works, and what its goals are.
Yeah, the MUFON mission statement is a scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of mankind. So basically that means we're trying to figure out what the phenomenon is, and that ties into all kinds of things like new technology, new propulsion, use of different exotic type of technologies like hydrodynamics, and it gets pretty deep. But as far as my case studies have gone, and I look at hundreds of cases, there is a phenomenon going on, and some of it does not appear to be our technology.
Got it. And this is very interesting. So you guys aren't just tracking events and transcribing what people are saying. You're also analyzing the nature of the technology that seems to be employed. Is that right?
Yeah, we investigate the cases. A lot of them are easy to solve. We get a lot around the 4th of July, and when Jupiter, Venus, and I think Saturn had a close conjunction, which looked pretty cool in the sky. We had a lot of cases call in on that, and those are pretty easy to go through pretty quickly because they give us the area of the sky, and we know there was an astronomical event happening at that time. So it's tough. I mean, the more you get into cases that seem to be something very strange going on, and credible witnesses, the stranger it gets. And it's like, I guess Arthur C. Clarke said, a technology that's sufficiently advanced, whether it be 100 years, 1,000 years, or a million years, is going to look like magic to us. And that's what some of these things just appear to be, an unexplainable phenomena, an anomaly that traverses our skies.
Gotcha. So I think it's really important for listeners to appreciate that MUFON doesn't have an agenda. They're not trying to prove that UFOs exist. It sounds like what you're trying to do is make sure that anybody that has a report has a place to bring it, and then you apply critical thinking and analytic skills, like, for instance, where Jupiter and Venus conjoined that night in the western sky. That may explain what a lot of people saw. So this is really interesting. So now you're the chief field investigator for Virginia, so I guess that implies that other states have investigative offices?
Yeah, there's about 30, 35 of us all together. We're in every state, but it's hard to organize each state, but sometimes we cross over. I'm a member of the Strategic Rapid Response Team, STAR team, so I can take cases in other states that are high profile. But what we try to do is, the days of hoaxing a lot of things have gotten a lot more difficult with the advent of drones and CGI and things like that. So there's certain criteria that I follow that tell me when I've got something pretty interesting on my hands or when I'm dealing with something that somebody's just kind of making stuff up.
Gotcha. And I imagine, like in every other field of endeavor, sometimes people do make stuff up. or they're genuinely confused by a natural phenomenon. And if people want to learn more about MUFON and they want to get into this a little deeper, does your organization have a website they can go to?
Yeah, there's two. There's www.mufon.com, and then there's our state website, which is the same, except for it's MUFONVA for Virginia.com.
Gotcha.
So,
And go ahead.
Yeah, it's just each state has an organization that tries to take cases. I assign cases, I work cases, I have a team of investigators I work with. A lot of them have government intelligence backgrounds, military backgrounds, Air Force backgrounds. So we've got some good people in the state of Virginia working on the cases. And the first thing we try to do is prove that it's either a hoax, astronomical phenomena, weather phenomena, or a man-made object. Because that's most of the time that's what they are.
Great. And so based on MUFON's analysis, most of the things that are reported, in fact, are explainable, and yet there are things that can't be explained. And I want to get into that a little bit later, maybe some of the more interesting things that have come up in recent times. But the reason you got in touch with us, and I'm really glad you did, is that we ran a video about the subject of UFOs, and there were some claims made on the video that you want to respond to, and maybe and offer some more information about. So, do you know which ones we're talking about there?
Yeah, I don't want to come across too harsh, but a lot of times people read something and they read just some random explanation for something, and then they buy into it, and they spread that across the internet or wherever. Oh yeah, that was a balloon, or oh yeah, that was a hoax. So the piece that came up was, I like the gentleman's video. It's just that when he started talking about the Trent photographs, Paul Trent photographed a UFO in 1950 in McKingsville, and he went along with saying that was proof to be a hoax with a string from a wire, and that's never, ever been proved to be a hoax. And the things I point out is, no matter how many people say it's hanging from a wire, there's no picture of the wire. There's no wire ever been seen in the resolution of the image. The Trents themselves were not the kind of people, and that's kind of story background. There's no evidence either way. But the Trents are not the kind of people to hoax something. They actually were not wealthy. They took 2 shots of this object and waited, a long time until they finished the roll to actually get it developed. They never made any money about it. They went to they both passed away, never saying anything different. The object Bruce McAbee did some really great analysis of it, and then working with Ray Stanford, who was the original Socorro incident investigator, who's in his 70s now. He just took the raw image, and in the raw image you can see this, what looks to be a plasma downflow or vortex below the object. And when the Trent said it tilted towards them, they got hit by a blast of warm air. And in the raw picture, you can see this vortex below the craft, and it's nowhere else. Nobody in them, especially in the 50s, would know anything about plasma coming from, an exotic vehicle, nor would they put that into the image or know how to or even think about it. So that's one of the examples I say when we see certain types of evidence of exotic propulsion, those are usually much more interesting as an object in the sky that could be anything. So the fact that there's this, and when you take the image, you just contrast it a little bit, there's also a thermal path that this thing makes through the sky that coincides with the direction that they said it came from. On top of that, their father saw it, and they reported multiple sightings in that area. So they didn't do it for the money because they never made any money. The camera roll actually sat under a sofa for a while, and somebody developed it, and then the pictures were in the window of a shop. But most of the reasons for hoaxing things are notoriety, money. They never wanted any of that. They probably weren't that interested in it because they didn't get the film developed for a long time. So the fact that when we analyzed, and we didn't do anything to the picture except use some high contrast, you can, in the raw image, you can see that plasma vortex under the vehicle, and then the admission that they got hit by a blast of warm air when it tilted towards them, which would explain that image. And then the fact that there's a thermal path through what was probably dusk. It was 7:30 at night, and there's a lot of fog in that area. The light's more polarized then, so you can see things a little bit clearer. But everything about that picture tends to lend the fact that it was a real object about 30 feet in diameter, some ways from the camera. This math that the guy referenced, that this mathematics supposedly proved there was a string hanging from the object, that stuff's been wrong a lot. And particularly that particular group of people, kind of reaching out on a limb there, it just doesn't add up. The math is not correct. There's no bend in the wire from where this thing's hanging from. At first they said it was one of the mirrors from a truck, which is probably 8 pounds, which definitely have pulled that wire down. There's also in some of the photos, these were in Life magazine, by the way, but some of the photos, there was a ladder that their child was on. They said they took the ladder and threw a string over the wire. Well, the ladder's about 6 feet tall. The wire is about 30 feet up in the air, and I don't think anybody played with high-tension wires back then, but it's just kind of ludicrous that people would say that this was solved as a hoax when there's absolutely no evidence of the string, of the bend in the wire. The object is a little bit different size in each picture, meaning it's moving towards the viewer at the time. But, you know, the string theory has been out there a long time, and nobody's ever imaged a picture of that string. So that's what kind of got me going. It's like saying Roswell was a weather balloon. Well, the government had 4 explanations for Roswell. I don't know what it was, but it certainly wasn't a weather balloon.
Right, right. And, yeah, I think, to me, one of the most compelling things is that when this was taken, you know, now we live in the digital age and manipulating, you know, visual imagery is a breeze. It was not easy to do back in those days. You had to be a professional with a lab. You had to know what you were doing. And it sounds like these folks were just, they saw something, they took a picture, didn't make a big difference in their life. It's interesting. Now is there I think you referenced a group. Is there a particular group that's out there consistently debunking or you know, trying to debunk phenomena like this? Is there one group or are there a number?
There's a bunch of people. I mean, the government themselves will set people up for disinformation because the bottom line is, and I believe that there is something that's traveling our skies with very high technology that's not made on this planet. To say what it is a big leap of faith. I can't say it's aliens or time travelers or interdimensional. I mean, if you know anything about quantum physics and string theory, it could be time-traveling extra-dimensional aliens, you know? It could be none of the above. But the thing is that when some of these objects display really advanced physics and they're not even built to fly in atmosphere. A lot of discs have been seen flying edge on, as have other types of craft. It's just that you can't read about something and think it's solved until you do a little homework, and almost nobody does homework. As far as this one, you know, it's either a string or it's real, and a lot of people that decide either way haven't really investigated it. That's our job. We investigate things. So when Ray Stanford initially broke down this image, the plasma downflow was obviously there. And so I took the raw image, Tony Angiola and I, we did the same, you know, we didn't ask Ray how to analyze it. We started using just Photoshop to analyze it, contrast, and sure enough, that plasma downflow is very clear. It's not a run off the emulsion or anything like that. The photograph actually has fingerprints on it. That's how poorly it was handled at the time. So in addition to the fact that there's evidence of exotic propulsion, there's no reason that Paul Trent would make this up, that his father would also join in on the hoax, and that they go to their deathbed, you know, not saying, sorry, we didn't mean to do that. It's just not the type of people to do that. Now, that's not evidence, but I think the picture itself shows enough unusual things in it to say that this was a real object some distance from the camera and that their story is 100% true.
Well, it's interesting too that the visual artifacts that suggest plasma propulsion were not even noticed in the initial presentation of the photo. In other words, if somebody was trying to fake that, right? If somebody was trying to fake this, they would have pointed that out, assuming they could even see it, and made a big deal out of it. But nobody did, and it sounds like all the focus has been on this supposed string, which you say is only provable by faulty math. Yeah, it's a tricky situation when somebody puts out a simplistic answer when the real answer is a lot more complicated and takes more time to describe. So thank you for clarifying that for us.
Sure.
It's really very helpful. And let me ask you this. So obviously nobody knows. Well, let's put it this way: we know that a percentage of these unexplainable phenomenon are unexplainable. They're not weather, they're not stars, they're not atmospheric phenomenon, they're not planes, they're not weather balloons. There's something else, and then by the nature of the behavior of these things, they seem to be operating with a different set of engineering than we're familiar with currently. And then the question is, who's making these things? This is something that comes up a lot. In fact, I just watched a program a couple of days ago about this. There's some belief that maybe this is a holdover from technology that the Nazis developed during their ascension. That they were involved in a very different form of science and engineering than we're used to or familiar with. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
Well, the Nazis were on the right path. They were so far ahead of everybody else. A couple more months, they would have had. They built the first jet planes. They built, von Braun designed the B-2 rocket, V-1, V-2, which was the basis for Apollo rockets that got us to the moon. So they were way ahead of everybody else, every other country as far as their technology. Making the leap, I know they were looking at, the Horton brothers had a delta-shaped craft. There were saucer designs that were made, but I've never seen evidence that any of us, and the Air Force did this too, the Avro car, every saucer design I saw just didn't function that well, the jet engine, whereas if some of these things are using what we think is manipulating gravity, then that's just something we're a long ways from. If these things are somehow able to manipulate gravity, they can manipulate time and space, they can operate in compressed time, which is showing up in some of the film that I've seen where something that might happen to them over 5 minutes or 10 minutes inside these craft is a quarter of a second to us. And so they might actually be able to touch down, mess with somebody, and then actually use that to propel. If we talk about compressed time and things like that, it gets very complicated. But if you understand some things about physics, gravity does that. Einstein proved it when it's in space. So Einstein proved that when he photographed stars behind the sun that shouldn't be visible, but the sun was bending to space and allowing you to see behind it. So if it has like a mini wormhole or able to capture that type of energy, because this type of propulsion takes a lot of energy that we haven't discovered yet, then, even if one crashed and we got all the pieces to it, which may or may not have happened before, we still wouldn't figure it out. I always use the analogy of giving Leonardo da Vinci an iPhone. You can give him 1,000 years and they'll never figure that out. He'll never figure out how it works. You won't figure out what a computer chip is. It's when you come across what looks to be the real thing, it's so strange that you're onto something.
Gotcha. Yeah, because an iPhone presupposes all kinds of esoteric knowledge, knowing various manufacturing techniques, knowing all kinds of things that if you don't have that background, the actual artifact itself, bizarre as it may appear, is going to be incomprehensible.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow.
So part of, just to give you an idea, and for any listeners, if you go to our MUFON PA website, click on my name in the articles, my analysis of the trend photo is there with some pretty clear images of the plasma downflow. But what we're trying to do here in Virginia, we still work cases, but the first thing we got to determine when we get cases, are we starting with a hoax? So most of us we're trying to get a lot of equipment together, but we're filming our own things in the daytime, which is the best time to film because these things seem to be around a lot. But we're filming our own objects in the sky, and that way we want to start with whether or not this is real or a hoax or somebody trying to pull our leg with some CGI.
So you're creating like a database of real imagery that you can compare against things that people bring in?
Correct. Because in one piece of footage that hasn't been made public yet, and I'm working hard to get it out, I just can't say a lot about it, but the footage shows the fact that this large craft was using a plasma beam in the direction of travel, and a well-known aeronautical engineer looked at this footage and then went back and wrote a breakthrough propulsion paper called the air spike. And what they discovered in the lab was if you shoot a beam of energy, in this case I think they used a rod that was energized, but when you shoot energy in front of these craft, it actually creates a vacuum in space where there's no air to push against, thus you can travel much faster, you don't break the sound barrier. And the evidence was in this film where this scientist watched it and then went through and started designing. If you just Google air spike, it'll give you all the data about how we're incorporating that into a lot of our missions to the moons, to other planets, to a lot of our technology, so that you don't have to push air out of the way. And that's a lot of resistance to all of a sudden not have to deal with, and gives you much faster speeds and silent flying. It's pretty involved. It's using some of these images produce Faraday rings, and they have magnetic venting around them where they're definitely warping the air. They have Doppler images, which would happen if you're moving so fast that you're in several places at once, like quantum physics has shown that an object can be in two places at once, and light is both a particle and a wave. So it's very interesting that even though it has been a CGI, there's certain things in some of these photographs, and applying new technology to old photographs is a way to pull some of this out, but you'll see some images that have evidence of this type of technology, but they were taken a long time ago when nobody even thought of plasma beams and Faraday rings and magnetic venting and that kind of thing. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't think about air as being dense, but air is pretty dense, and it is a fluid. And if you're trying to go at high speed through this fluid, it creates a lot of resistance. So if you could somehow neutralize that, that would be huge.
And the air spike bends the shock wave around the object instead of plowing through it, because when you reach about 770 miles an hour, which is the speed of sound, that's where you hear the sonic boom, because you're pushing through that barrier that's created around your aircraft. So
sure.
It's like going in space. In space, you can go, as long as your engine is producing thrust, you can keep increasing your speed to infinity.
Mm-hmm. Theoretically.
And also, theoretically, but if you're mastering gravity, this whole thing about not going faster than light might not be true anymore. And even Kakao and some of the famous physics, particle physics, and all these guys that are really sharp understand that. There are ways that you don't necessarily have to travel to space. If you fold space, speed of light is not an unbreakable barrier. If you're not actually, it's called traveling through hyperspace. But a lot of the images that we're seeing are showing us this science, and we're getting more info because of what these things are doing.
Got it. So this is fascinating. So the old pictures and current stuff, but old pictures too, are starting to make more sense as we understand more about science and engineering in general.
Right.
Wow.
And a lot of the old pictures, I mean, there's a lot of guys, Billy Meyer and Adamski and all that fake their photographs, threw tires, rims in the air and frisbees, whatever. And those are easy now using new technology to expose, but sometimes you get an image that has a lot of properties in it that a hoaxer wouldn't have thought of in 1950, 1952, 1948. So it's interesting to look at these on a computer and pull out things that no one would have thought of to put in a hoax in the 50s.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, in the 50s, maybe somebody would hang, a hubcap from a tree, yep. but predict, plasma fields and all these other things, and embed those things in your image. I mean, we're talking about pretty darn near impossible. I mean, if someone were that intelligent, they would use their mind for something more productive,
Exactly.
Very interesting. Are there any interesting cases of things in recent weeks or months that you can talk about that have really caused everybody to scratch their head and say, we really can't say what this is?
Well, we investigated. We're actually presenting in the Dallas Expo, and we presented at Mufon's National Symposium last year. We've been working almost 3 years on the Socorro incident of 1964. That was investigated by Project Blue Book of the Air Force, and it's one of the 701 cases that's still classified as an unknown. What's interesting about that case is a police officer saw a landed egg-shaped craft with two small beings the size of 10-year-old boys next to it when he thought he had found an overturned vehicle or airplane in 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico. And what's interesting about that case is that the Air Force couldn't solve it, and they went to great lengths. We have the Blue Book file that show the President was asking, Joint Chief of Staff was involved, the CIA, the FBI, Dr. Hynek and a friend of mine, Ray Stanford, were on site investigating this at the time, and no one could come up with an explanation. There was no earthly, Hughes, Bell, White Sands, Alamogordo, none of these places had an object that was egg-shaped that flew silently with a blue flame, which was observed in 64 or even now. And in our presentation, we show there was a 2010 launch of a model that's supposed to land on the asteroids that's kind of that shape with four girder-like legs, which this object had, but it blew up on takeoff. Nobody was in it. But, if we had something in 1964 like the Socorro incident, we certainly wouldn't be flying something in 2010 that blows up on the launch pad, because that's a propellant-based object, whereas the object in Socorro in 64 was it wasn't a propellant-based. It didn't blast flame or anything. It was just a blue knifing flame that lifted off the ground. Then the blue flame went away. It was hovering silently. Then it accelerated to supersonic speed, probably 20 miles in the next 3 to 4 minutes.
Wow. And pilots report seeing things like this not infrequently. Is that correct?
Well, pilots usually will talk about it after they retire, because when they report it when they're on duty, they end up flying a desk, which means they got demoted. And there's several instances of that. The Japan airline flight that was followed by a huge object that had smaller objects coming out of it that was painted by 3 different radar. I believe he lost his job after he talked about it. So what's interesting, and I've had this happen whenever I go to the airport, I start talking to people. I talked to a gentleman that was in line with me who was a pilot. And when somebody starts a story like this, like he did, well, I'm going to tell you a story, but you can't use my name. Then I know I'm going to get a really good story that he's never going to report to anybody. He's just going to tell me anonymously. And that's exactly what this gentleman did. He was a military pilot. He was pulled out of line at Washington National once, told he had to fly on a transport plane to, I think, somewhere in Asia, and the SEAL team was on the plane, and he said, "Hey, what are you guys? You guys going after the people crossing the border?" I think it was Cambodia. And they said, "No," and they knew he had clearance and everything. And he said, "A little bit more interesting. We have UFOs passing through the border and apparently landing in this area, so we're going to investigate it." Of course, you never hear about that publicly, but I've had a lot of pilots and some astronauts tell me stories off the record that let me know that there's something going on. The government is pretty sure they know about it. I don't think they know what it is. It's that the thing is, if you have this high technology visiting us, they would clamp it down. They would make it so secret because the military implications are incredible. If you have an object that can perform like some of these do, you would win every war if you could, travel faster than the speed of light and disappear and reappear and have energy-directed weapons. So anything regarding UFOs that's real, it's a military, black, top-secret project. And when they find something that's really good, it'll become classified. You'll never hear about it again. And then to the public, they'll say, it was nothing. It was a weather balloon.
Right, or a string or a blimp.
What's interesting is we get a lot of triangle reports in Virginia, and I'm pretty sure that these are military. And one thing we discovered recently, because we had some good footage of a triangle flying over a highway in Virginia, the only known very large triangular-shaped drone is flown out of Virginia in the whole country. And so that would easily look very unusual to somebody on the ground. But I'd say a good, of 10% of cases that are really unusual, probably 8% are military objects, man-made.
Mm-hmm. So there's a potential military reality, because that's another theory that I hear often, is that all this stuff is U.S. military, and they don't want us to know they've got it. But clearly, something that's flying via plasma and is probably beyond current engineering.
Yeah, and you have to, I think, I'm pretty sure there was life on Mars. There might be life under the oceans of Europa. But if either case is true, then mathematically there's life everywhere. And the Drake equation postulates that there's probably 100 million civilizations just in our Milky Way galaxy. And there's over 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, then life is everywhere. So there's a possibility that we've been visited by several different species that are in different levels of their own technology. So that's why some of them are different, some are a little bit cruder. And, even though we fly to Mars in different places, we crash all the time. And it's not unusual if these things are remotely piloted or piloted by some type of sentient clone that occasionally they come down, occasionally they run into trouble, occasionally they don't work properly, and they're probably a long ways from home. So it's interesting because if you look at where we were 200 years ago, nobody could have predicted where we are now. Imagine a civilization that's 500,000 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
You can't. You can't even imagine it. First of all, they have to survive their own atomic age and survive their own wars and make it to space, which a lot of civilizations probably don't survive that, and we're still in that window where, we don't know if we'll survive our own atomic age, because it would make sense that if there are others out there and they know of us, they would monitor us because we're very militaristic, we're killing each other in droves, and so they don't want that kind of, species flying out into space starting to colonize planets because we're just not very good, we're not good to each other, so how are we going to be good to anyone else?
Gotcha. About people seeing things and not wanting to talk about them, I have a cousin who was very active in the merchant marine, which means he was out at sea a lot. And he says it was really common out in the middle of the Atlantic or, one of these oceans at night to see all kinds of crazy light shows that made no sense. But he had no motivation to, report them or spread the fact that he'd seen them to anybody. He mentioned it to me casually, and he just shrugged his shoulders, and that was it. But, what the heck? I mean, how could there be a light show in the middle of the Atlantic in the middle of the night, But there's an example of a guy that saw something that, and he said it persisted for about a half hour, and it was these light spheres that were just sort of swirling around and going up and down and left and right and just sort of fooling around. And he didn't know what to make of it. His fellow sailors didn't know what to make of it. And there was no motivation for any of them to report it because who are they going to report it to? They didn't know about MUFON. And there's a lot of discouragement for people. Hey, if you see, don't let people think you're crazy. I'm sure police don't get rewarded for reporting bizarre, unexplainable things.
No, military especially. You don't want to open your mouth.
And if you're in the military, you're probably told you didn't see that, and that's the last time we want to hear about it.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, can you give us again the website for people that want to go deeper into this?
www.mufon.com is the MUFON worldwide website. Our local website is mufonva.com, and we've written a bunch of articles. We have a lot of our presentations. We have a lot of data. And, you know, we were both on the Hangar One TV show, which gave us some, you know, some opportunities to meet more people. We're going to be on Discovery Channel's NASA's Unexplained Files starting in February, but we're not the kind of people that want to, you know, I tell people if you get into UFOs to become rich and famous, you're going to be poor and unknown. It's not our motivation. Our motivation is to seek the truth, discover the truth, but by being on these shows and doing radio shows and doing a lot of presentations that we do, we meet other like-minded people and we kind of pool our resources, because we always need a good astrophysicist, you know, we always need a good engineer and scientists to look at some of the data, because I'm not an expert at breaking down, you know, footage. I know how to do it with Photoshop, but I'd rather have an optical physicist do something like that. Just like with metal, things like that, you need somebody that's their PhD study, and usually it's best to give them material and not tell them where it's from and just have them say, what do you think of this? And that happened at Socorro when some metal scrapings off one of the landing gears was in a rock, and Ray took it to Goddard. The scientist there said, you know, this is a zinc iron alloy, but the way it's combined doesn't conform to any chart on Earth, including Russia and the United States, of metals and how they're combined. And he was real excited about the fact that that might prove that this thing was not made in this world, but then he got clamped down on and nobody ever heard from him again, and the metal disappeared. So it's a fascinating case, and we've done some presentations on that, which are out on YouTube, things like that. But, you know, when you dig into it and sometimes you're confronted with things, it's best to not hear from, you know, do some homework and, you know, look around in the daytime. People are always looking down at their cell phones and not looking up anymore. There could be stuff going on above you that would be much more fascinating than what you got on your cell phone, but a whole different world out there, you know?
And you said earlier that there's a lot of activity in daylight. Is that so?
Yeah, the best time at night when you film things, you got to light in the sky. It could be anything. You know, bugs close to the camera that are self-illuminating can look like a great object flying by at great speed, but it's a lightning bug that was an inch from your aperture. In the daytime, especially at dawn and dusk, the light is polarized. That's a really good time to catch objects because there's not as much, say, noise in the air. The air is ionized. It's easier to see things. And because of the types of propulsions these things use, they'll produce colors. You know, plastic can be green and red and orange, but they'll produce these colors that kind of give away the fact that you're dealing with something using some type of propulsion that's not a drone, it's not a propellant, it's not a blade. And so daytime you get a lot more data also. And these things are around. I mean, it's so many times people have filmed a normal event or taken a picture of a normal event and then kept something in the background that they didn't see. And a lot of times it's a bird, it's a bug, it's a problem with the camera lens or something, but sometimes it's something really extraordinary. So, you know, before making a decision either way, I tell people do a little homework and go out and try to find these things yourself. You might be surprised by what you see.
Cool. And if somebody does capture something on film or even has something maybe that they see, they can contact a MUFON one of the MUFON websites, and there's a way for people to make reports on the website?
Yeah, you can go in, make a report. If it's in my state, it'll be assigned to me. And whichever state you're in, it gets assigned to that chief field investigator. But, you know, we try to do the best we can. You know, like I said, we usually start with trying to prove it's not something unusual. It's kind of Occam's razor where what you're left with is probably what the answer is. But sometimes you get footage and descriptions and reactions of very credible people like pilots, military, policemen, where they were truly freaked out, and they have some really weird footage, or they took some weird pictures, and there were weird effects. You know, all the animals got quiet. You could hear a pin drop. They're on a road where no cars went by when something unusual happened. So there's a high degree of strangeness with some of these cases. The closer they are, the stranger it is. The further away they are, you know, it's hard to tell. But there's a lot that can be gathered from searching around the daytime. Like I said, at night, it's just hard to determine what you're getting. There's none of this data. The best thing, which Ray used to do in the 70s, and which is starting to get done again, is have a gravimeter and a magnetometer, so you can record fluctuations in the electromagnetic field, and also get a certain pulse. I think it's about 60 hertz that shows up on a lot of these with instrumented studies, where these things affect many different fields, magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, and are causing the change around them because of the exotic propulsion they're using.
Got it.
And then that shows up on film.
And that can be, so you can see it on the film, but if you have the right instruments, you could also measure it.
Right. You could say, all right, at this point in the film, we were getting this data from the magnetometer, and this thing was screeching, you know, there was a big change in the electromagnetic field. Then you've got 2 points of data, and with the gravitometer, you have 3 points of data, and, you know, cameras are a lot more sophisticated. They can pick up a lot of more information. So when you get more than 1 point of data, which is a film or a photograph or a witness, that helps a lot in determining the validity of some of these cases.
Cool. Well, you know, earlier when at the very beginning of this, you gave the mission statement of MUFON, and part of it was, I think you said, in the service of humanity, right?
For the benefit.
For the benefit of humanity, and I really have to say, based on, you know, talking with you, that it sure sounds like that's what you guys are doing. You're just trying to figure out what's going on. You don't have an axe to grind. You're not trying to prove that UFOs exist, but you're also not you're also looking at things that are anomalous and measuring them, and, you know, making your best estimates as to what they might be or could be. And I think it's fascinating that, for me, that these old photographs and these old accounts are making more and more sense as we become more sophisticated in science and engineering. That's just really really eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
just to add to that, there's a famous picture from the 50s, I believe an engineer took in Brazil. It shows a cigar-shaped silver object traversing the sky with a big plume coming out of the back of it. A kind of a man-made looking object, but in the 50s, I don't know of any silver cigar-shaped objects with no fins or wings or anything that were flying around. But the interesting thing about that photo, and a lot of people wouldn't have thought of this, is using new technology, when you blow it up, the object is reflected in the river below it. And that's hard to fake. And it's 1950s photo. So you got kind of, a little bit more evidence in that picture when you blew it up to see that that thing was reflected in the river. And it was probably several miles away from the photographer. But it's a big shot. It's very impressive. Looks like a missile without any wings. But in the 50s, it's just kind of strange.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very interesting topic. And I, for one, am glad that there's a group that's approaching it in such a serious, rigorous way. And it's neat that you're building a community of scientists and engineers who can help not only interpret the data, but try to explain possibly what some of these technologies are based on. So we've been talking to Ben Moss of MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. He's the chief field investigator of Virginia. And Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this to us. And I want to encourage everybody that's interested in this topic. It sure sounds like MUFON is a great group that's approaching this in a very serious, sober-minded, rigorous way. And maybe this is our path through all the disinformation to actually get to maybe not answers, but at least intelligent questions about what's going on. So Ben, thank you very much for writing us and for taking the time to explain some of these things. I've really been educated, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks for hearing my side of the story.
Oh, of course. Okay, take care.
All right, thank you, sir.